The auction hall of Kareth's reach smelled faintly of hot circuitry and desperation, a combination that had become the planet's unofficial perfume ever since the oceans withdrew into memory. Traders filled the tiers of the dome, their data slates flickering with protein forecasts and livestock valuations, speaking in the brisk tones of people who had learned to measure morality in calories. At the center of the hall, restrained within a lattice of humming gravitic anchors, stood the Giantess. Even weakened, she rose like a fallen monument forced upright. Her name was Selari, though the auctioneer referred to her only as Lot 73. The suppression collar around her throat pulsed with a dull violet light, dampening the subtle distortion in the air that betrayed her dormant control over gravity. She was colossal, easily 40 meters tall despite the forced compression of her scale, her long limbs bound in energy chains thick as transit rails. Her skin carried a faint pearlescent glow beneath the harsh white auction lights, and across her shoulders ran delicate constellations of bioluminescent markings that flickered weakly, like tired stars. Silver eyes, enormous and reflective, watched the crowd without blinking. Her hair, once described in intercepted archives as solar gold, spilled in tangled waves down her back and pooled near her shackled ankles. Even malnourished, even catalogued as livestock, she possessed a presence so commanding that several bidders avoided meeting her gaze, as if afraid she might invoice them for staring. Prime mass, the auctioneer announced, voice amplified through ceiling drones. Genetically enhanced guardian species. Estimated yield sufficient to supply a metropolitan sector for, he checked his slate, a very satisfying fiscal quarter. Laughter rippled through the stands, thin and brittle. Selari did not laugh. The suppression pylons around her emitted a low harmonic hum, keeping her cellular restoration matrix dormant. She could feel the planet beneath the city, dry soil aching like a wound, but her power was locked behind layers of law and circuitry. Interstellar trade statutes classified her kind as agricultural assets. It was remarkable what a change in paperwork could accomplish. One millennium you were a planetary guardian, the next you were in tray. The butcher's brand was brought forward, its surface glowing orange. The crowd leaned in. A merchant in the front row whispered, "Think of the stakes," with a reverence normally reserved for religious icons. "Hold the grill," a voice called from the back. Heads turned. A man in weather-beaten armor walked down the central aisle, boots echoing against the composite floor. His name was Darien Voss, though most registries listed him as Resource War veteran, unstable. He carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had survived worse ideas than this one. His left pauldron bore scorch marks. His right hand held a portable credit core glowing with liquid light. "I'd like to place a bid," Darien said mildly, "preferably before anyone marinates the merchandise." The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, this lot has already reached optimal valuation." "Add 20%, Darien replied. "Call it a humanitarian surcharge." Murmurs surged. Corporate agents checked their feeds. The bid cleared, the numbers flashing across the dome in decisive green. For a moment, even the suppression pylons seemed to hesitate. "You intend immediate processing?" The auctioneer asked cautiously. Darien glanced up at Selari. From this angle, she was a mountain of restrained strength, silver eyes studying him with something that might have been suspicion or the faintest spark of curiosity. "No," he said, "I intend to cook something else entirely." He looked back at the crowd. Maybe hope heard its high in nutrients. A few uneasy chuckles escaped. The brand dimmed. Contracts transferred. Ownership changed with a sterile chime. As the chains adjusted to her new registered master, Selari felt the faintest flicker beneath the collar, a tremor in the gravity field, a whisper of returning strength. Darien met her gaze again, and for the first time since her capture, someone looked at her not as meat, but as possibility. The transport crawler groaned as it hauled Selari's restrained form beyond the city perimeter, its suspension protesting every shift of her weight. Darien stood in the forward cabin, boots braced wide, watching the skyline of Kareth's reach shrink into a jagged silhouette behind heat haze. Officially, he had purchased livestock for private processing. Unofficially, half the corporate sector was now trying to guess what recipe required orbital surveillance. "You're aware," Selari's voice resonated through the crawler's frame, low and melodic even through the suppression collar, "that I could crush this vehicle with minimal effort." Darien tapped the dashboard. Please don't. I just fixed the suspension. Parts are impossible to find in a dying ecosystem. A pause followed. Even weakened, she radiated scale and restrained force, her immense hands bound in gravitic cuffs anchored to the crawler's flatbed. The violet pulse at her throat flickered steadily, dampening the subtle distortion in the air around her. Pebbles along the road occasionally lifted a centimeter before dropping again, as if reconsidering gravity. You purchased me, she said. Humans do not spend such resources without expectation. True, Darien admitted. I once traded a fusion cell for a sandwich, regretted it for a week. This is more expensive. And your expectation? That you stop thinking of yourself as inventory. Silence again, heavier this time. The crawler left the paved routes and entered the open flats where cracked earth stretched like shattered ceramic to the horizon. Atmospheric monitors blinked red across the dash. Soil viability, negligible. Water content, mythological. Darien killed the engine near an abandoned terraforming array half buried in dust. The metal towers leaned like exhausted giants paying tribute to the larger one bound behind him. He stepped out, boots sinking into powder-fine soil. I'm going to deactivate one collar node, he called up to her. Just one. Enough to see if you're still you. You assume I desire proof. I assume you deserve it. He climbed the access ladder bolted along the crawler's side until he reached the base of her throat. Up close, the suppression collar's latticework hummed with corporate encryption seals. He removed a compact disruptor from his belt and began calibrating frequencies. If this explodes, he muttered, I'd like it noted I tried something noble instead of profitable. You are unusually candid, Silari observed. War cured me of subtlety. He triggered the disruptor. The collar flared, violet shifting toward white. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the air rippled. A loose bolt rolled across the crawler bed and hovered midair. Dust lifted in delicate spirals around her colossal ankles. Silari inhaled sharply. The bioluminescent constellations across her shoulders brightened by a fraction. Beneath her, the cracked soil shivered. A single fissure closed with a soft, grinding sigh. Darien nearly fell from the ladder as gravity tilted sideways for half a second. Good news, he said, gripping a support strut. You're definitely not livestock. The floating bolt drifted back down, the ripple subsided, the collar stabilized at a weaker hum. You risked detection, she said quietly. Detection was inevitable, he replied. Corporate scanners probably think I'm seasoning you. And you are not. No, he said, I'm buying time. For what? For you to remember how to be a guardian. She studied him with vast silver eyes, unreadable but no longer empty. Guardians require a world worth guarding. Darien gestured toward the barren horizon. That's the funny thing about worlds. They complain, they collapse, they overheat, but give them a chance and they surprise you. Like people. A faint tremor passed through the ground again, gentler this time. Tiny motes of green flickered in the dust where her shadow fell, microscopic life reactivating under a whisper of restored cellular energy. You believe I can reverse this planet's decline, she said. I believe you're the only one who didn't cause it, he answered. That puts you ahead of most of us. In the distance, a faint glimmer crossed the sky, corporate drones adjusting orbit. Darien noticed, of course. He always noticed. We don't have long, he said, climbing down. They'll come looking for their investment. Silari's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Then perhaps, she said, we should ensure their investment becomes unmarketable. Darien grinned up at her towering form. Now you're speaking my language. By the time the first corporate interceptors cut through the upper atmosphere, Darien had already moved the crawler beneath the leaning skeleton of the abandoned terraforming array. The rusted towers interfered with most long-range scans, though not well enough to inspire confidence. Above them, the sky shimmered with descending patrol craft, their hulls glinting like polished teeth. You are being hunted, Silari observed calmly. Technically, Darien replied, checking the power cells on his disruptor rifle, we are being audited. Her luminous markings pulsed faintly brighter now, tracing elegant patterns across her immense shoulders. The single weakened collar still hummed at her throat, but the air around her carried a subtle density, as though gravity itself were reconsidering its loyalties. A transmission crackled through the crawler's external speakers. Registered owner Darien Voss, a clipped voice announced, You are in violation of Asset Preservation Clause 44B. Return purchased livestock to authorized processing. Darien keyed the mic. I'd love to, he said cheerfully. Unfortunately, she's unionized. A pause. Clarify. She objects to being eaten. Corporate silence followed, the most expensive kind. Above them, a trio of enforcement drones detached from the main cruiser and descended in tight formation. Their grav engines stirred dust into spirals around Celari's feet. She watched them without flinching. They will escalate, she said. They always do, Darien answered. It's practically a hobby. The first drone fired a restraint beam. The ground at Celari's side liquefied under the impact, but before it could wrap around her limbs, the air warped. With a restrained inhale, she shifted the local gravity vector by a few degrees. The beam curved harmlessly upward, snapping into the sky like a misplaced ribbon. Darien blinked. I'm adding that to my list of favorite physics violations. The second drone adjusted trajectory. Celari lifted one enormous hand despite the remaining cuffs. Pebbles and broken shards of metal rose around her palm, orbiting in a slow, deliberate halo. With a gentle motion, almost delicate for someone her size, she redirected them outward. The debris struck the drone's stabilizers, sending it wobbling into the desert floor in a sputter of sparks. Two down, Darien said. I assume you're charging extra for planetary defense. I am not a subscription service, she replied evenly. The third drone hovered at a cautious distance. Its scanners swept across her body, mapping energy signatures. The collar flared in response, trying to dampen the surge building within her cells. She winced slightly and the ground beneath her trembled. Darien noticed. Don't overextend, he called up. You're not at full strength. I am aware, she said, her vast silver eyes narrowing. I merely resent inefficiency. The drone transmitted new data to orbit. Moments later, the cruiser shifted position, its underbelly cannons rotating toward the terraforming array. They intend to neutralize infrastructure, Celari said. Of course they do, Darien muttered. Nothing says civilized commerce like orbital bombardment. The cruiser fired a warning blast. The shockwave tore through the upper section of one rusted tower, sending it collapsing toward Celari. Without hesitation, she altered the gravity around the falling structure. The massive beam slowed midair, then settled gently onto the sand like a sleeping animal. Darien stared upward. You just caught a building. It was impolite to let it fall, she answered. Another transmission crackled through the air, this one less composed. Asset 73 exhibits prohibited sentience indicators, escalating to containment protocol. Containment, Darien echoed. That sounds cozy. Celari's bioluminescent markings brightened again, more vibrant now, casting faint patterns across the cracked desert floor. Tiny fissures in the soil began to knit together under her feet, subtle but undeniable. Life stirred where none had in decades. The cruiser hesitated. Your power is increasing, Darien said quietly. It returns in fragments, she replied. The planet responds. As if in agreement, a thin veil of clouds began forming overhead, drawn together by shifts in atmospheric pressure she subtly manipulated. Moisture condensed in the high air, tentative and fragile. The corporate cruiser recalculated. Destroying her now would mean destroying the data they craved, the restoration matrix encoded in her altered genome. They are reconsidering the profit margins, Darien said. Fear is an effective negotiator, Celari observed. The cruiser's cannons powered down slightly, though its drones continued circling. A tense stalemate settled over the desert. Darien exhaled slowly. Congratulations, he said. You've officially become too valuable to cook. Celari looked down at him, and for the first time there was something unmistakably alive in her expression, not merely strength, but resolve. I was never meant for consumption, she said. I was meant for restoration. Then let's restore something, Darien replied, glancing at the faint greening patches spreading outward from her colossal feet. Preferably before they figure out a new menu. The corporate cruiser lingered in the upper atmosphere like a creditor, unwilling to forgive a debt. Its cannons remained powered but uncertain, tracking Celari's every movement as clouds slowly gathered above the desert for the first time in decades. Darien stood beside the crawler, helmet tucked beneath his arm, watching orbital trajectories scroll across his wrist display. They're calculating, he said. If they fire, they lose the restoration matrix. If they don't, they lose control. Salari's luminous markings pulsed steadily now, no longer flickering, but flowing in deliberate currents beneath her skin. The weakened collar at her throat strained against the energy building within her cells. Around her colossal feet, thin blades of green pushed through cracked earth, fragile but stubborn. They built a system where life is inventory, she said. To abandon that system would require evolution. Darien smirked faintly. Humans aren't great at that. We usually wait for something to explode first. As if on cue, a sharp tone echoed from orbit. A final transmission cut through the desert air. Asset 73, cease unauthorized planetary manipulation. Failure to comply will result in atmospheric sterilization. Darien winced. They always escalate to sterilization. It's like a reflex. Salari lowered her vast gaze toward him. If I unleash the full restoration matrix, the collar will rupture. I may not survive the energy transfer. You don't know that. I calculate a 43% probability. That's practically optimistic, he said. I've survived worse odds ordering street food on Mars. She almost smiled. Almost. Above them, the cruiser's cannons brightened again. The sky trembled with charged particles. Darien stepped closer to her immense form, placing one gloved hand against her ankle, dwarfed by her scale yet unafraid. You're not livestock, he said quietly. You're not an asset, you're a guardian. And guardians don't ask permission from accountants. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then the collar flared violently as she drew in power from deep within her altered genome. Gravity warped outward in a widening sphere. The cruiser's targeting reticles flickered. Pebbles rose. Sand spiraled into luminous arcs around her towering silhouette. She released the matrix. Energy cascaded from her in silent waves, not destructive but transformative. The desert floor shuddered as microbial life reactivated in exponential chains. Dormant seed vaults buried beneath the soil awakened. Atmospheric processors in the broken terraforming towers hummed back to life, hijacked by her signal and repurposed. Moisture condensed in thickening clouds until the first drop of rain fell, hesitant, then confident. The cruiser's cannons powered down completely. Profit calculations shifted in real time. Destroying her now would mean annihilating the most valuable ecological engine in known space. The corporate fleet withdrew several kilometers, maintaining distance instead of dominance. Darien shielded his face as wind rushed past. Well, he said over the roar of returning atmosphere, that's one way to renegotiate a contract. The collar shattered in a burst of white light, fragments falling harmlessly into newly damp soil. Salari swayed, her immense form trembling. The gravitational distortions settled gradually, like a tide receding. Darien watched in alarm. Hey, stay with me, I just paid a fortune. Her vast silver eyes focused on him, clearer than before. The probability model has updated, she said softly. Survival likelihood has increased. Good, he replied, exhaling. I was terrible at explaining refunds. Rain began falling steadily now, soaking into ground that had forgotten the sensation. Across the horizon, green spread outward in expanding waves. Sensors on Darien's wrist blinked from red to amber to cautious green. The cruiser transmitted one final message. Sentient classification under review. Trade designation suspended pending regulatory reassessment. Darien laughed, almost disbelieving. Translation, they can't sell what can sue them. Salari slowly lowered herself to one knee, not in weakness, but to bring her luminous gaze level with him. Up close, her presence no longer felt restrained or diminished. It felt anchored. You purchased time, she said. You chose defiance over consumption. Turns out, he answered, glancing at the rain-swept horizon, hope has better long-term returns. In the distance, settlements began broadcasting signals. Requests for aid, offers of alliance, whispers of rebellion across frontier channels. The system built on exploitation had cracked, not from violence, but from restoration. Salari rose again, not as inventory, but as guardian. Darien looked up at her